Welcome to the School Leadership Brief. Today is Saturday, February 15th, 2026. So in today's episode, we're going to take a look at something that was prompted by a comment on another video. That comment reads in part, "It was better before the federal government came in," speaking of our education system. And it goes on to say, return responsibility to the states and individual school districts. So this is a comment that touches on a very common sentiment. It reflects very real frustration, very real fatigue, and for many people, it feels true. But today I want to slow down and ask the question, did the federal government take over education? Because structurally, constitutionally, the story is more precise than the claim suggests. So, to begin with, the U.S. Constitution doesn't mention education, and that's not an oversight. That's structure. The Constitution creates a federal government of limited, enumerated powers, primarily listed in Article 1, Section 8, and education is not one of those powers. That's where the 10th Amendment comes in. It states that powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states or to the people. From the founding of the country, education has been a state responsibility, and that has never changed. Here's the nuance. The federal government doesn't directly control education, but it does use its spending power. Congress can say if states accept federal education dollars, they must meet certain conditions. That's conditional funding. It is not constitutional authority over curriculum. And influence through funding is not the same thing as a federal takeover. That's a critical distinction. So, what do states control? States control academic standards, graduation requirements, teacher credentialing, curriculum frameworks, state assessments, and funding formulas. Local school districts decide which textbooks to adopt, daily schedules, instructional materials, professional development, and discipline policies. The federal government does not select your math textbook. It does not write your state standards, and it does not determine your bell schedule. If someone says return responsibility to the states, it's important to understand. Responsibility has largely remained there. So what does the federal government actually do? The federal role expanded primarily through civil rights and equity legislation. Beginning with 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which provided federal funding to support low-income students. Or in 1975, IDEA, which guaranteed access and protections for students with disabilities. 2001, No Child Left Behind, which required states to test students and publicly report the results. In 2015, there was the Every Student Succeeds Act, which maintained testing requirements while returning flexibility to the states. Federal K-12 funding accounts for roughly 8 to 10% of total education funding nationally. Now, those dollars come with some conditions. They tell us don't discriminate, serve students with disabilities, report outcomes transparently. That is accountability tied to funding. It's not federal control of curriculum. Many educators feel buried under testing pressure. That concern is real, but structurally, federal law requires testing in certain grade spans. States design the standards. States choose the assessments. States decide how results are weighted. And states determine consequences. The architecture of accountability systems is overwhelmingly state-driven. Let's be real, blaming Washington is just politically convenient. But operational pressure is largely shaped at the state level. So, was education better before? Let's address the nostalgia embedded in the comment. Quote, "It was better before the federal government came in," close quote. Better for whom? Before civil rights enforcement, schools were legally segregated. Students with disabilities were frequently excluded, and English learners had minimal protections. Funding inequities were widespread and often invisible. The federal government's most consistent role has been protecting access and requiring transparency. So we can debate bureaucracy, we can critique policy design, but we should be historically accurate about what before actually meant. The real debate is not federal takeover. It's how do we balance state authority, local control, civil rights protections, professional autonomy, and public accountability. And those are all governance questions, complex ones. But saying the federal government took over education oversimplifies the structure of American federalism. States remain overwhelmingly in charge. If we're going to debate education policy, let's debate it accurately. Education in the United States is primarily a state function. The federal government's largest interventions have centered on civil rights, disability access, and transparency. That is not a takeover. That is federalism operating within constitutional boundaries. And in leadership, clarity matters.